Tonight we reveal something that foreign policy experts have been warning about for weeks, something that diplomats in capitals around the world are scrambling to understand, something that has fundamentally changed the rules of international relations. A new doctrine is emerging from Washington, not written in official policy papers, not announced in formal speeches, but visible in every action, every statement, every threat coming from the Trump administration. This doctrine has a name. Analysts are calling it different things: coercive diplomacy, maximum pressure 2.0, America First foreign policy. But tonight we're going to call it what it really is: regime change as a weapon, not as a last resort, not as an unfortunate consequence, not as something that happens after diplomacy fails, but as the opening move, the first card played, the threat that comes before negotiations even begin. This is not how America has operated for decades. This is something new, something unprecedented, something that has dictators around the world very nervous and allies around the world very confused. Tonight, we break down exactly what this doctrine means, where it came from, and why the next 12 months could reshape the global order entirely. To understand what's happening now, you need to understand what came before. American foreign policy since the end of the Cold War has followed certain unwritten rules, certain norms that both Republican and Democratic administrations respected, even when they disagreed on specifics. The first rule was that regime change was a last resort, something you did when all other options had failed, something you approached reluctantly with international coalitions, with legal justifications, with exit strategies. George H.W. Bush pushed Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait but stopped short of Baghdad. Bill Clinton intervened in the Balkans only after years of diplomatic failure. George W. Bush invaded Iraq with a coalition of allies and at least attempted to secure UN authorization. Even Obama, who authorized action in Libya, did so through NATO and with international consensus. The second rule was that threats were calibrated. You didn't threaten what you weren't willing to do. You didn't make promises you couldn't keep. You maintained what diplomats call credibility by matching words to actions carefully. The third rule was that allies mattered. American power was amplified through alliances, NATO, the OAS, bilateral partnerships. You consulted before acting. You built coalitions before moving. These rules had exceptions. These rules were sometimes broken, but they existed. They shaped how the world understood American power. Tonight, those rules appear to be gone. The Trump administration has introduced something different, something that breaks from both Republican and Democratic predecessors, something that has turned regime change from a consequence into a tool. Let's be specific about what we're seeing. In Venezuela, the administration didn't wait for negotiations to fail. They didn't build an international coalition first. They didn't exhaust diplomatic options before escalating. They came out swinging. Immediate recognition of opposition leadership, immediate seizure of state assets, immediate bounties on government officials, immediate signals that military options remain on the table. This wasn't escalation after diplomacy. This was escalation as diplomacy. The threat itself was the strategy. And Venezuela isn't alone. Look at the language being used toward Cuba, toward Nicaragua, toward Iran. The pattern is consistent. Maximum pressure applied immediately. Regime change discussed openly. Threats made explicitly. This represents a fundamental shift in how American power is deployed. Let's examine this doctrine more closely, because understanding its logic is essential to understanding where this goes next. The Trump administration appears to operate on a specific theory, a theory that previous administrations rejected, but that has deep roots in certain foreign policy circles. The theory goes like this: dictatorships survive because they believe they can outlast American pressure. They believe that if they hold on long enough, American attention will shift, American administrations will change, American resolve will weaken. Therefore, the argument goes, the only way to change their behavior is to make the threat of regime change immediate and credible, not something that might happen eventually, something that could happen tomorrow. Under this theory, threatening regime change isn't reckless, it's strategic. It forces adversaries to take American demands seriously because the alternative isn't more negotiations. The alternative is losing power entirely. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has articulated versions of this thinking. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has echoed it. And President Trump himself has made clear that he sees unpredictability as an asset, not a liability. They never know what I'm going to do, Trump has said repeatedly. And that's exactly how I want it. This unpredictability is a feature, not a bug. It's designed to keep adversaries off balance, to prevent them from calculating that they can wait out American pressure. And in the short term, it appears to be working. Consider Venezuela. For years, Nicolás Maduro survived international pressure. Sanctions came and went. Diplomatic isolation ebbed and flowed. The Guaidó challenge in 2019 faded. Maduro remained. He remained because he calculated, perhaps correctly, that the United States wouldn't actually follow through. That threats were rhetorical. That regime change wasn't really on the table. The Trump administration appears determined to change that calculation. By moving immediately to maximum pressure, by placing bounties on officials, by discussing military options openly, they've sent a message that Maduro cannot ignore. The message is simple. This time is different. This administration will not wait. This administration will not be outlasted. This administration is willing to do what others only threatened. Whether that message will actually topple Maduro remains to be seen, but it has clearly changed the dynamic. Reports from Caracas indicate genuine fear in Maduro's inner circle, genuine uncertainty about what comes next, genuine scrambling to prepare for scenarios they previously dismissed. That fear is the doctrine working as intended. But Venezuela is just the test case. The doctrine has broader applications that are now becoming clear. Iran is watching. For decades, Tehran has played a patient game with Washington, absorbing sanctions, waiting out administrations, calculating that time was on their side. The Trump administration appears determined to end that calculation. Statements from administration officials have made clear that regime change in Iran is not off the table, that the current pressure campaign is designed not just to change Iranian behavior, but potentially to change the Iranian government. This is significantly different from even the first Trump administration. During Trump's first term, maximum pressure was applied, but regime change was rarely discussed openly. Now it's part of the conversation. Cuba is watching. The island nation has survived American pressure for over 60 years. Multiple administrations have tried and failed to dislodge the Castro regime and its successors. The Trump administration appears willing to try again, with new tools and new intensity. Nicaragua is watching. Daniel Ortega has consolidated authoritarian control while avoiding the international spotlight that focused on Venezuela. That invisibility may be ending. And even larger adversaries are taking note. Russia and China are analyzing this doctrine carefully, not because they fear American regime change operations against them directly, but because they understand that a more aggressive America changes their calculations everywhere. If the United States is willing to pursue regime change in Venezuela aggressively, what does that mean for Russian allies, for Chinese partners, for the network of relationships that Moscow and Beijing have built with governments Washington opposes? The ripple effects of this doctrine extend far beyond any single country. Now let's consider the risks, because every doctrine has costs, and this one carries significant dangers. The first risk is credibility collapse. Threatening regime change only works if the threat is believed. If the United States threatens and then fails to follow through, the doctrine backfires spectacularly. Adversaries learn that American threats are hollow. The tool becomes useless. This means the administration may face pressure to escalate, even when escalation is unwise. Having made threats, they must either follow through or accept that future threats will be dismissed. It's a trap that previous administrations tried to avoid by making threats carefully. This administration has walked into it willingly. The second risk is unintended consequences. Regime change operations have a troubled history. Iraq was supposed to be quick and clean. It became a decade-long quagmire. Libya was supposed to prevent humanitarian catastrophe. It created a failed state. Syria's civil war demonstrated how regime instability can spread chaos across entire regions. There's no reason to believe Venezuela would be different. Maduro's fall could lead to democratic transition. It could also lead to civil conflict, humanitarian crisis, or a power vacuum filled by forces even worse than the current government. The administration has offered little indication that they've planned for these scenarios. The third risk is international isolation. America's allies are uncomfortable with this doctrine. European nations have expressed concern. Latin American partners have pushed back. Even countries that oppose Maduro have questioned the aggressive approach. If the United States acts unilaterally, repeatedly, it risks finding itself alone. And American power, however formidable, is amplified by alliances. Squandering those alliances has long-term costs that may not be immediately visible. The fourth risk is domestic backlash. Americans are tired of foreign interventions. Decades of war in the Middle East have left the public skeptical of regime change promises. If this doctrine leads to military entanglement, the political consequences could be severe. The administration appears to believe they can achieve their goals through pressure short of military action. That may prove optimistic. Let's talk about what the experts are saying. Because this doctrine has generated intense debate among foreign policy professionals, supporters argue that the post-Cold War consensus was failing, that decades of cautious diplomacy didn't prevent Russia from invading Ukraine, didn't prevent China from building islands in the South China Sea, didn't prevent Iran from expanding its regional influence, didn't prevent North Korea from developing nuclear weapons. By this argument, caution was weakness, and weakness invited aggression. A more assertive America, one that puts regime change on the table, restores deterrence that had eroded. For too long, our adversaries believed they could push and America would back down, said one administration ally at a recent think tank forum. That era is over. Critics argue the opposite. They contend that the post-Cold War period, for all its problems, avoided great power conflict. That caution wasn't weakness, but wisdom. That the aggressive approach risks stumbling into conflicts that dwarf anything we've seen since World War II. Threatening regime change against nuclear-armed adversaries or their allies is not strength, argued one former State Department official. It's recklessness dressed up as toughness. The debate is not merely academic. It reflects genuine uncertainty about which approach better serves American interests. And that uncertainty is shared by allies who must now decide how closely to align with a more aggressive America. So where does this go next? In the short term, expect the Venezuela pressure campaign to intensify. The administration has invested significant political capital. They need results to validate the approach. If Maduro falls or flees, the doctrine will be validated. Supporters will argue it proves that credible threats work. The approach will likely be applied elsewhere with even more confidence. If Maduro survives, the administration faces a choice: escalate further, potentially including military options, or quietly accept that the doctrine has limits, undermining its future application. Either outcome shapes what comes next. Beyond Venezuela, watch Iran closely. The administration has signaled that Tehran is a priority. If the Venezuela approach is deemed successful, Iran will likely face similar maximum pressure with explicit regime change undertones. Cuba and Nicaragua may follow. These smaller nations offer opportunities to apply the doctrine with less risk than confronting major powers. And throughout, Russia and China will be calculating, adjusting their strategies, preparing for a more confrontational America. The next 12 months will reveal whether this doctrine represents a sustainable new approach to American foreign policy or a dangerous gamble that overreaches and collapses. Tonight, we've mapped something important. A shift in American foreign policy that affects not just Venezuela, but the entire global order. For decades, the world operated under certain assumptions about American behavior. Those assumptions are being rewritten in real time. Regime change is no longer a last resort. It's a tool of first resort. Threats are no longer calibrated to credibility. They're deployed for maximum psychological impact. Allies are no longer consulted before action. They're informed afterward and expected to follow. This is the Trump doctrine. Whether you support it or oppose it, understanding it is essential, because its consequences will shape the world for years to come. Some will see this as America finally acting with the strength its power allows. Others will see it as America abandoning the restraint that made it a trusted leader. History will judge which view was correct. But history is being written now, in decisions made this week, in threats issued today, in responses calculated tonight. The world is watching Washington more closely than it has in decades. Allies are nervous. Adversaries are calculating. Neutral nations are choosing sides. And at the center of it all is a doctrine that says one thing very clearly: the old rules are gone. The new rules are being written. And regime change is now a weapon that America is willing to use. That reality changes everything. For dictators who thought they were safe. For allies who thought they knew what to expect, for a global order that assumed American restraint. Tonight, restraint looks like a relic of the past. Tonight, something new has emerged, and tonight the world is holding its breath to see what comes next. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We're tracking every development in American foreign policy and its global consequences. Share this video with anyone who wants to understand what's really changing in Washington. And drop a comment below. Do you support the Trump doctrine, or do you think threatening regime change is too dangerous? I read every comment, and I want to hear your analysis.